let's say an incident happened, right, in production, you can just easily check, okay, in which version did it start happening, right? Most most of the incidents are just resolved by rolling back, right? You don't want to be paged in the middle of the night and then you start actually fixing the bug for an hour. Typically, it's
Yeah,
like, okay, where was it introduced, and let's just roll back to the version before that. So
yeah.
this setup of easily loading a micro-frontend or a version of the application shell or a combination of the both uh, really allows you to pinpoint, okay, this is the change, and it allows you to also run end-to-end tests. I think nowadays it gets more recognition that it's not just something that you as developers want, it's actually having business impact. So
Hmm.
having an outage of several hours is actually costing very big clients a lot of money. So it actually it can save a company a lot of brand reputation, it can save a lot of money, trust with customers. So it has that recognition as well. It's not just something that developers ask for. It's actually also business people that they want to have this good uptime, good reliability of their observability allows company to avoid disruptions in their software, in their digital experiences, right? Well, maybe you're familiar with monitoring a system. It's basically you use what we call melt data, which is metrics, events, logs, and traces to monitor your system health. Is it working? Is it down? Did it run out of CPU, etc. Sony Relic have different agents, the browser agent, Node agent, Java agent that gets all these metrics from your software systems and provides this insight, of your systems. We've seen over the last decades that software becomes increasingly more complex and more complex, and it's really hard to understand, especially with distributed system, how things are breaking. So having this insight is almost like a must nowadays.
Hmm.
And in the past, we had monitoring. Now we're going, or they say observability. I think like our backend systems get like a trillion requests per minute, and we ingest billions of data points every minute. So it needs to scale pretty massively. So just having a full stack developer that also does the backend on the side is not really an option. So first of all, this microfront architecture is really focused on making sure teams are independent and can release to production without depending on other teams. So first of all, we've built a CLI that allows people, like a tool CLI that allows people to quickly bootstrap a new project and kind of load it inside this existing platform and like go through the whole cycle from creation to development to push to production. So if teams
Hmm.
really want, they can push a hello world, let's say, capability in the platform or mini application in the platform to production within a day.
Hello, today on Señors Scale, we're joined by Erik, Principal Software Engineer at New Relic. Erik had spent more than 8 years shaping the front-end architecture at one of the leading observability companies, helping build the platform developers rely on to understand what's happening inside their complex system. As a principal engineer, he lives at the intersection of deep technical work, long-term architecture, and guiding teams. Welcome, Erik. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. That's quite an intro. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be a guest.
I hope it did you justice. I know you've been working for a long time, and it's hard to summarize your big career in such few words. So thank you for joining.
Yeah, no problem. Glad to be here.
So how did you start as a programmer? Where were the first steps you took to programming?
Well, it's actually interesting. I actually didn't start as a programmer. I started as a web designer a
Mm,
long time ago in the age of Dreamweaver, Macromedia Dreamweaver. I don't know if you remember, a long time
I
ago.
do.
And I really, really love designing, both for the web, but also for just designing in general, making beautiful art. And so I started that. I really love Photoshop. But soon, when I started doing internships and working, I started to be involved also in developing in PHP and web technologies, obviously JavaScript, HTML, CSS.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, that's where it all started. I worked for a web agency, starting to do more coding. I did media technology on the university, which was a variety of technologies as well. It was like gaming, it was into sound, it was into web applications, so all kinds of things. Then at some point, I moved to Barcelona in Spain, and I started my
Welcome.
career here in a startup that did educational games for schools, which was very interesting in ActionScript, which
Okay.
I really loved. So I did educational gaming there in a small company. At some point, I moved to a consultancy where I worked with our mutual friend, Natalia, that you also know. We
Interesting.
worked for some big client names, building big web applications, web platforms, websites with very high standards, which was a really nice learning experience. On top of that, it was here in Barcelona, the tech industry was kind of booming, very international, young people. You get to know a lot of people. It was a lot of fun being in that company. Learned a ton. And then at some point, I moved to New Relic, where, like you mentioned, I'm already there for 8 years. So inside the company, I also had quite a journey, which I can explain if you want, what
Yeah,
I've been
yeah.
doing in the
I'm actually curious. Like, you joined as a senior engineer, or what was the position you joined at?
Yeah, so I joined as a senior engineer and I started working on a UI component library. I don't think it was really a design system, it was more a UI component library, building things like, well, obviously like buttons and stuff, but I think I started working on a time picker, which was quite
Mm-hmm.
a challenging component, but was quite fun, I have to say. I really enjoyed this. The team was really talented, really amazing, and there's just kind of like a building a really reusable, extensible component that all the rest of the company can use in many ways. It's kind of like an art to design it in a way that it really works. So I really enjoy that. But I joined New Relic and soon after, as a senior engineer, as you asked, and soon after, the company started quite a big project. They had
Mm-hmm.
several different single page applications for each product. And they wanted to unify each of those single page applications into a single platform. And that's kind of the
Mm-hmm.
platform people know that New Relic is today. But that journey started like 8 years ago, roughly 7, 8 years ago. So I was very lucky with the opportunity to join that team. And I became quickly after that the lead of that team. But the interesting part here is that I started this new platform, which is kind of the product, but underneath we started designing this new architecture that needed to solve an organizational issue,
Mm-hmm.
which was how can we scale by development in New Relic? How can we build this new product, not just with one team, but with 10 teams or 20 teams or 50 teams in the future?
Mm-hmm.
And that was a really interesting challenge, I think, because was not a lot of references out there. And we started building what people now know as a micro-frontend architecture, but that concept didn't even exist. There were companies struggling with the same issue and trying to do the same, but the architectural pattern didn't exist. So we started building this, making a platform that's really extensible, that you can load things inside the platform, not only internally for us, also by our customers, which was a really interesting project to work on. And I became the lead of that team. Then at some point, also because I was doing the work, I became also a lead engineer. But this project started growing and growing and growing. So we went from one team to multiple UI platform teams to provide the tooling and the infrastructure and the services that support this scaling of UI development, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and I always was involved in these UI platform teams and this group of teams and working on that until a certain point that I was really fortunate again that they needed an architect for this group.
Mm-hmm.
And I took this opportunity to take that step. So it meant like moving away hands-on from initiatives and coding to be more in the direction of technical leadership. And from there, I was first architect of 4 or 5 teams, this group of the UI platform, let's say. After that, I got another group that I'm responsible for, which was for the dashboarding, data exploration, data visualization, which was another 4 teams. So I was kind of overseeing 8 teams. And more recently, this is now since 2 years, I became kind of the lead architect of the wider organization, which is called the UX platform, which includes a couple additional groups. But I think this what defines my journey in New Relic most is that we built this architecture and this UI platform on how to do UI development at scale at New Relic with many, many teams working at the same product at the same time, which is quite a challenge.
That's pretty impressive, gotta say. Sounds super cool. Can you go a little bit on the details of the architecture? How did you build this micro-frontend architecture? Like, what architecture decisions did you make? Give me some details if you
Okay,
can.
so there are probably many. Let's see um, how I can say this in a structured way. So first of all, this microfront architecture is really focused on making sure teams are independent and can release to production without depending on other teams. So first of all, we've built a CLI that allows people, like a tool CLI that allows people to quickly bootstrap a new project and kind of load it inside this existing platform and like go through the whole cycle from creation to development to push to production. So if teams
Mm-hmm.
really want, they can push a hello world, let's say, capability in the platform or mini application in the platform to production within a day. Or existing teams can release 20 times, 20 updates to production in a day if they want. So it's really providing this isolation for teams to have a quick time to market, let's say. So how do you achieve that is making sure those micro frontends are really loosely coupled. So
Mm-hmm.
they should not have dependencies with other micro frontends. One big architectural piece is also the application shell.
Yeah.
So you have a shell. We have a special team kind of responsible for that because it's kind of different than the micro frontends. So you have an application shell that has the ability to load those micro frontends based on the routing and then just renders it in the right place. So these are the high level pieces. For us, you have to start thinking about also how you organize the code. So you can go with a monorepo, you can go with a polyrepo approach.
Mm-hmm.
For us at that time, like I said before, we didn't only want, so one of the requirements was not only for internal developers, but also for our customers to extend the platform with micro frontends. So obviously, monorepo is not going to work in that setup because you cannot
Mm-hmm.
really easily share a monorepo with a customer. We could go for a hybrid approach for a monorepo and a polyrepo, but we thought like since we need to build the tooling already for kind of in a polyrepo approach, let's go for that because it more closely aligns with what we want to do also for third-party extensibility or programmability. The customers also can extend the platform. And yeah, some things you need to think about when you design this architecture. The browser is obviously very global in nature, like CSS is
Mm-hmm.
global. You have the window object. You have only one route, right? That it needs
Yeah.
to be shared. You have URL state that needs to be shared. So you need to start thinking about how can you do that in a way that doesn't bring coupling. Yeah, so there's some cross-cutting concerns that you need to think about to make sure that not every team is gonna kind of reinvent those cross-cutting concerns by themselves. So there's actually quite some setup and thinking upfront before you can kind of easily roll out.
That sounds super interesting. I'm actually in the process of doing this myself in our company, in
Okay,
our app.
how's it
And
going?
I haven't started. I'm just now collecting like data. I know I want to do it. I'm thinking, oh, should I use module federation? Should I build it myself? Because I realized I'm gonna hit the same problems a lot of people already hit. Like, you, I'm guessing the shell keeps all the authentication system. The routing is in the shell, and you have to pass it down to the micro-frontends. Did you use iframes for the micro-frontends?
So that's a really good question, a really interesting question. So like I explained, we moved from the, let's say, legacy apps that were like different single page apps into the platform.
Yeah.
And one of the benefit, the perks of micro frontends is that you can integrate with iframes into the new application. Let's say do the migration iteratively to, let's say, what we call native iframe directly in React.js. So we had applications that were built with Angular and other stacks, that worked very differently. They looked a little bit differently. So what we did, we used iframes to integrate them in this single app. And then over time, we started kind of to migrate those old experiences. Either some experiences like, okay, yeah, no, we can just remove it because it's no longer necessary because the UI experience and flows just have changed too much. And some were just migrated one-to-one, still
Hmm.
connecting with their backend service that also needed to migrate to the new way of doing things. So yeah, over time you can use iframes uh, to leverage this migration effort. You can also use iframes for isolating your micro frontends in general, but
Hmm.
there's some downsides to that. In my experience, what I've seen is that, well, obviously iframes have some limitations. So if you have, let's say, overlaid content or popovers, they get
Hmm.
clipped off, so it can
Yeah.
have a visual impact, which is not great. What I've also seen is that in some cases, for example, our third-party extensibility for customer is loaded for security reasons in iframes, which is another good use case. But if you have too much of those iframes on the page, let's say a dashboard with a lot of widgets, and each of those widgets is in an iframe, you can run into slowdowns in performance. So that's also
Hmm.
something to keep in mind. I would recommend not using iframes just for encapsulation purposes, because I think you can achieve the same. If you have your tooling set up, you can kind of scope the CSS with hashes and create kind of encapsulation that way. So I don't think it's really necessary. So I would avoid it if possible, but if there's some cases that it really makes sense, like migrations or if for security reason, because the code that you load into the page is not owned by you, these kind of things.
Interesting. So how, if you have like a poly repo setup, how does the CI/CD pipeline inject into the shell, the application basically? How do you do it if you're not using iframes?
Okay, so let me see if I can explain it in a simple way. How we have it set up, I don't know if it's the best setup, but what you can do, you have the application shell, right? So you're a developer, you load the platform application shell, and what you can do is kind of signal that you're running from local, right?
Yeah.
So what you do is instead of loading the assets directly from your environment, either staging production, you just connect to your development server and load the assets from there. So it's just linked up to your local. But it's a
Hmm.
combination that you run both the, let's say, the live version and your local together. So they get kind of composed during runtime.
Hmm.
So we just rely on runtime composition. We are not an e-commerce site where we do server-side rendering and we need to squeeze out the most performant way to load the page to get kind of the best conversion rates, right? We
Hmm.
are behind authentication. It's a very data-intensive app. So yeah, we do just the composition client side. So
Hmm.
when you build those micro-frontends, you send the metadata and you store it in some database. Then the application shell, based on the route, knows, okay, this micro-frontend has this ID that is linked to the route, and you have the metadata. The metadata contains the assets of the component that needs to load, and you load it from a CDN and then render it in its place where it needs to be.
Wow, that's
Does
pretty
that
cool.
does that describe? Could you follow along?
So so it's like server-driven UI, but for micro frontends, right? Like you make a backend request, and the backend tells you based on the route what needs to be rendered, what micro frontends need to be rendered.
Yeah.
Oh, pretty cool.
Yeah,
Pretty cool.
and there are very different ways of composition. Like, yeah, I've seen you can compose like a whole app, let's say, a single page app inside a single page app. I've seen that you can do it per page. You could, like, there are companies that do even more granular per component. It really depends what you want to achieve in your organization with your business, what you want to optimize for. All these things have different trade-offs on how you organize yourselves and your teams and how they have to communicate together.
Yeah, but it's pretty cool, gotta say. Very interesting. I didn't think about it until this. I was always thinking about the iframe solution. How does Module Federation do it? Because I know they're not using iframes, right? Do you know?
They are not using iframes. Well, it's actually quite. So I'm also not like the most model federation expert, but I understand, I think, on a high level how everything works. It's kind of similar to what we do now. We have a kind of this custom architecture because it just didn't exist. We're actually now in the process of migrating uh, to model federation.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very similar how you set it up. You can either do it in a monorepo or polyrepo, that both works. And you have the concept of a host, which is kind of your application shell that loads remotes, which are kind of like your micro frontends. And when you, let's say, define your remotes, you define your dependencies that you depend on as your micro frontend, and you define kind of, let's say, an identifier, which is just the import path, let's say. And whenever another remote or a host imports you in JavaScript, the, let's say, module system just knows which remote to load, right? So then you
Mm-hmm.
can hook it up to your router, say, okay, if this route loads or gets triggered, I should say, then lazy import this remote path, and then it knows how to find it, and it just renders it.
Okay, so basically what you did, but without the database, they did it with addresses in a way.
Yeah, so the metadata it just gets resolved during runtime because that metadata is stored in the module system.
Okay, that's pretty cool. So I like that we started in discussing micro frontends, but I really wanted to discuss observability because, in case people
Okay.
don't know, Relic is like one of the lead companies in observability. Can you explain observability as a concept and what you guys are doing, and why should developers have observability in their apps? Why is it like critical?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm really focused on UI development in your company, so I can try to explain it. I don't know if I will explain it in the best way. I'll give it a shot. So basically, observability allows company to avoid disruptions in their software, in their digital experiences, right? So maybe you're familiar with monitoring a
Mm-hmm.
system. It's basically you use what we call melt data, which is metrics, events, logs, and traces uh, to monitor your system health. Is it working? Is it down? Did it run out of CPU, etc. Sony Relic have different agents, the browser agent, Node agent, Java agent that gets all these metrics from your software systems and provides this insight, yeah, of your systems. We've seen over the last decades that software becomes increasingly more complex and more complex, and it's really hard to understand, especially with distributed system, how things are breaking. So having this insight is almost like a must nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
And in the past, we had monitoring. Now we're going, or they say observability. I think Observability encapsulates even more, how I understand it. So it's also about the relationships between different components of the system and the network, the infrastructure, the services, the UI layer, which could be mobile or front end or even a TV, desktop, it could be anything. And also, besides the telemetry health data, we try to combine it with other business metrics like product analytics, for example, right? You can see how the user journey goes and if they rage clicked in the mobile device or in the web app. So yeah, combining all these things to get kind of insight how your applications are performing. That's kind of observability in a nutshell.
That's interesting. Yeah, I was just joking before that if I get paged because of observability during this call, like I have to drop off. So it's like observability is needed, so when your production is also going down or something really really bad happens to your system.
Yeah, and I think nowadays it gets more recognition that it's not just something that you as developers want, it's actually having business impact. So
Hmm.
having an outage of several hours is actually costing very big clients a lot of money. So it actually it can save a company a lot of brand reputation, it can save a lot of money, trust with customers. So it has that recognition as well. It's not just something that developers ask for. It's actually also business people that they want to have this good uptime, good reliability of their services.
Yeah, I remember I used to work at Glovo, and when we had an outage, a war room was set up, all the on-call people, staff, principal engineers had to join, but also someone from the business side was pinged, and he had to be inside of the war room so he knows, okay, this country is not working right now, I need to call my people so to let them know, blah, 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 blah. So I think, yeah, it impacts every part of the business right now.
Yeah, that's really important as well because when these types of things happen, and they will happen. It's kind of unavoidable. Problems will happen. It's also about how you manage the communication with your customers, right? And sometimes it also requires some, let's say, business decisions on what the resolution should be, right? Maybe you decide, okay, this region is not working, but we keep it that way a bit longer, right? To avoid that all the other regions also go down, right? Like these are sometimes very tough decisions to make. So it's good that leadership is also part of those incidents and what you called it, war rooms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how does it work behind the scenes? Like, let's say on the front end side, right? You import an SDK, configure it with like your ID, whatever, whatever. How does it capture the errors, the performance, the routes? How does it, just by inserting that agent, it knows everything that happens in your app?
So first of all, I'm not part of this browser agent SDK team, so I don't know all the internal technical details, but I probably know enough to kind of explain how it works on a high level.
I would love that to
So
know. Yeah.
it's basically how you describe it because there's some kind of library which we call an agent, but it's basically some kind of SDK. You add it to your page, ideally before everything else runs, right? And it just hooks into native browser APIs and
Mhm.
start tracking all kinds of things. So page load times, errors, AJAX requests. If you use marks and measures for performance tracking, it automatically captures those for you. So it tries to get you as much out of the box from your browser insight as you want. Obviously, some things are configurable, like session replay, that you can replay the session of the user. You can configure
Mhm.
that, or logging. You can configure some of those things to kind of also control the amount of data you ingest. And then on top of that, you have also APIs that this SDK or agent exposes. So you can use those APIs to track custom errors, to log messages, to measure performance as well with marks and measures. Um, so yeah, it's a combination of getting a lot out of the browser out of the box, so people don't have to do much, and configure that, and custom implementation. You can send custom events to track how the user interacts, things like that.
And in your micro frontager setup, do you have like an SDK only on the shell, like you add the agent in the shell and then you cover everything? Or does each micro front end have its own agent, let's say, and it tracks only their encapsulated stuff?
That's a really good question because we kind of have both. So first of all, and you actually probably also need both. They're just different perspectives. So first we have the agent on the whole application level, which is, let's say, the application shell, because you want to know how it's performing kind of as a whole, right? But then you also have these individual teams that own a part of the platform that are only interested in errors coming from their micro-frontend. And then your question is kind of like, okay, how do you do that? If you just have one agent, how is that working? And the browser is so global. So yeah, we since we started this journey, there was no solution on this architecture, and obviously also observability was not really prepared to provide observability for that as well. So we have kind of built our own, let's say, wrapper or our own SDK on top of the browser agent that allows to scope errors and performance and these kind of things to the micro frontend, because our SDK has that context on where it's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing is that over time, more and more companies, especially bigger companies, started to also get interested in micro frontends and started to want to implement that. So we heard from many, mostly big companies, that there's a need for micro-front observability and for other solutions, or a better solution to provide this scoping mechanism out of the box. So in New Relic, we're also talking with customers about this, and we're innovating, seeing what we can do in this space to kind of bring an even better solution to make it easier to observe also micro frontends.
That's pretty cool. And I'm thinking about this. So how do you decide, how did you decide how to split the teams in this micro front end? I'm guessing you have the shell team, which handles the shell. And then for the UI teams, you're splitting them in basically feature base, or like, how did you split them into teams? What was the main idea behind them?
Yeah, so the simple one is the application shell, as you mentioned. There's a team for that just to handle that. When you start thinking, I mean, the microfront is kind of very similar in a lot of ways, not in all ways, but in a lot of ways to micro services. And you start organizing your teams around like a bounded context, that they say, or
Okay.
a domain, about a
Okay.
domain of features. So if you have a domain, let's say in our platform, there's a domain that is logging, right? So there will be a team for the logging capability. So you can design your micro frontends around that logging domain, which when that team works on that, they are the logging experts, right? Like they are the domain expert on that. So you want them to own that domain. Also, technically, what happens if you have multiple, let's say, smaller pieces in that domain, often they have shared code, shared logic, right? So it's probably best that that team kind of owns that and manage that so it can be reused between the things. And they can also own the end-to-end experience of logging in the product, right? It's not only the UI, you're working also with the PM that knows the customers that asked for logging features, right? And that gets incoming feature requests, that knows the competitors in the logging domain space, right? And you have the backend services that are optimized for logging ingest. So you have this whole team around this domain that can build kind of a really great capability or feature. But yeah, you could say feature, but then feature, in my mind at least, it becomes quite granular.
Yeah.
I like to think more about domain topics. And sometimes the domain is so big that you create subdomains under it, right? So I like to think more in that way. Yeah. So that's how we organize. Like we have a team about logging, we have a team about dashboarding, we have a team about, and
And the teams are full stack, or are you have front ends, back ends, QA? What are the members of the team in your?
This has changed over time, and there's not really a rule. Whatever makes sense the most. I know teams that are full stack, but when a domain is bigger and you even need more specialized knowledge on the backend and front end, let's say it's typically split between backenders and front enders. For example, well, our backend systems are quite huge. I think like our backend systems get like a trillion requests per minute, and we ingest billions of data points every minute. So it needs to scale pretty massively. So just having a full stack developer that also does the backend on the side is not really an option, right? But there might be some, there might be some teams that have kind of a more simpler domain, which is maybe, I don't know, some user management or something, right? But that they can maybe do both. Not saying that user manager is not the best example, but you get the idea, right? Some things are a bit more trivial, needs to scale less, demand less like expertise. So there you can have a full stack. And to answer your question completely, we don't really have QAs, dedicated QAs. So the company really values that the engineers also test their things properly, are accountable, are on call. So we have we have a test architect and we have some people dedicated to testing, but we don't have that every team has their own QA. We don't have that set up. I don't know if that's good or not, but that's just how New Relic has.
I've seen this more and more, that there's no more the QA role. At least here in Barcelona, it's very, very not part of the company that often, like it used to be like 10 years ago or 7 years ago, where each team had 2 or 3 QA people. But talking about testing, how do you, at the micro-frontend level, how do you test? Like, you write unit tests, do you have end-to-end tests? Do end-to-end tests cover multiple front ends if you have them, micro front ends?
So in the Micro-Frontend setup, people can just write end-to-end tests. They use Playwright, and it can happen. I mean, it will happen that most likely more Micro-Frontends are involved. But in theory, if you design your end-to-end test properly, you should only test kind of the features that are part of your micro-frontend and not really assert any things that come from other micro-frontends. That would be strange. So people can kind of test, let's say, relatively in isolation, because micro-frontends don't have these dependencies, like strong dependencies on other micro-frontends, right? Like if another micro-frontend breaks, in theory, it should not break your micro-frontend. It should be really isolated like that. So that helps with the end-to-end testing. And this is just baked in our UI infrastructure, in our tooling. People get that with the CLI in their developer experience out of the box. And obviously we have unit testing framework in place for them to write unit tests or integration tests.
So the end-to-end tests run in the CI pipeline. Does it boot up just the Microsoft front-end without the shell? So it runs the test on that?
Yeah, so what I tried to explain earlier is that when you locally develop, you're actually not really booting up the whole application kind of in a local isolated environment. No, you just run your change against what's running in let's say a specific environment. So what happened is like you load, let's say, the staging environment with a special flag that loads let's say the PR release on top of that, and then you run the end-to-end test, and it verifies it's working. Yeah.
Okay, and I'm guessing you can do the same with prod. Run prod with your branch micro-frontend if you want to.
Yeah. This setup is quite flexible, and sometimes it's really useful as well, because like, let's say an incident happened, right? In production, you can just easily check, okay, in which version did it start happening, right? Most of the incidents are just resolved by rolling back, right? You don't want to be paged in the middle of the night and then you start actually fixing the bug for an hour. Typically, it's like, okay, where was it introduced, and let's just roll back to the version before that. So this setup of easily loading a micro front end or a version of the application shell or a combination of the both really allows you to pinpoint, okay, this is the change, and it allows you to also run end-to-end tests against a specific version or combination of versions, which is quite flexible and useful sometimes. Yeah.
I'm getting more and more ideas and questions just by talking to it. One thing I realized with this, that how you're building it and what happens with like duplicated dependencies. Like if one micro frontend has I don't know, date picker, and another micro frontend has the same date picker, you're loading it that library twice in the shell, right?
No, so there are different layers to this. So first of all, you have kind of your core libraries like React.js and your design system and your data visualization library. These ones we kind of load as, let's say, singletons, and we enforce all our micro frontends to just adopt. So we would never have multiple versions of React running in the same product.
Okay.
You might ask, like, okay, what do you do if you need to upgrade and go to the latest version of React? This is thankfully possible because most of the time those frameworks and libraries like React, they provide two versions backward compatibility, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you can kind of bump, and then all teams kind of, okay, get rid of your deprecated React APIs in the next year, and then the next year you could bump again. And it's manageable to push those higher frameworks. Then on on the next level, you have like shared reusable components, right? And how we deal with that. So we try to duplicate as much as possible. So
Mm-hmm.
if it's shared code between the micro frontends, the bundler just kind of creates a separate chunk for it, and then you use it in multiple other bundles, let's say. If you want to share between teams, that is a different approach. We have a mechanism to share functionality like that,
Mm-hmm.
which you can control kind of which version gets loaded by all the other micro frontends. And yeah, if you use like just a plain old npm package, then yes, it gets duplicated and duplicated per versions. Now that we also kind of transitioning to model federation, what model federation does is you declare your dependencies and version ranges, and when you declare on a specific version in a range, if it's already loaded by another micro frontend, it knows that because it has that, let's say, I forgot the name for it, but it has this dependency graph, and is able to say, okay, this micro frontend depends on the same version, or this version is already loaded, it's in your version range, so just use that chunk that was already loaded by that previous micro frontend. So we do some of this custom dependency management now, and the idea is if we move to model federation, this comes out of the box by the framework, which is really nice. But yeah, you have to configure it the correct way. Also in model federation, you can provide some of these dependencies that should always be a specific version and always a singleton. So all these things are possible.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I'm glad it's been done like this, because I'm thinking, okay, you're gonna have 200 versions of React in the same app, and nobody wants that.
Yeah, it is actually possible with model federation to actually do that, to kind of scope multiple versions of React or different frameworks and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have to keep the end user in mind. Like one of the differences between, let's say, microservices on the back end and micro frontends on the front end is that you have to take performance and UX consistency in mind, right? Because maybe in the microservices world you use different versions, but it doesn't really matter, right? Nobody's gonna notice really. But in the front end side, you will start having bigger bundle sizes. You might start see differences between the different versions, right? And so it's a more of a problem in the micro frontends world, which you definitely should keep in mind. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And how is, let me think. In your role as principal engineer, do you also manage people, or just, let's discuss about, because it's different at different companies, right? So how, at what level is it with the business side? Like, who do you report to, and how do you manage people and teams and stuff like that? What's your day to day in a business sense?
Yeah, let me try to answer that. So, like you said, every company has kind of different structures. So maybe it
Mm-hmm.
helps for me to explain kind of the New Relic setup, let's say. So we have like senior engineers, lead engineers. Well, we have software engineers, senior engineers, lead engineers, and then principal engineers.
Mm-hmm.
And then besides kind of these levels, you can have different roles that we call, which is kind of different than maybe some other companies do it. So besides that I'm, let's say on the principal engineer level, I also fulfill the architect role. But
Okay.
we have another role of staff engineer,
Mm-hmm.
which you might like other companies have staff engineer, senior staff engineer as levels, let's say. For
Yeah.
us, we use that as a role. So I fulfill the role of architect, which is basically more of a technical leadership role where you start helping teams, guiding teams with their technical decisions, and you will be accountable for their technical decisions in the long term. You work with teams, you try to level them up, mentor, coach them,
Mm-hmm.
unblock them in situations. And besides that, you try to stay technical as well. So hopefully you also do some coding. When it comes to architect, typically the coding, like you don't want to block teams, right? You don't want to be
Yeah.
in the initiative and people are waiting on you, but you're busy with some other high priority stuff. So typically the easiest thing to do is like POCs, trying things out, or things like that, like things that are not in the critical path of the initiative of teams. So now that, so I started with one group or overseeing one group, and I moved to two and three. So there's a lot of teams. So besides, so I'm doing the architect role. I started reporting first to a director,
Mm-hmm.
but now I'm directly reporting to the VP of engineering.
Okay.
Besides that, because our, let's say, group of groups is the most UX focused, I'm also a lot involved kind of in being the UI architect for the company, working directly with the CTO, with the chief on things like engineering standards, for example, for UI development in the company and other topics similar to that. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah. Yeah. Really cool. So you still code and you mentor people. You don't manage them directly. Yeah, I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, you said that. So no, I don't have a team. So I collaborate or I kind of have a team of other architects that kind of take care of the groups that I'm overseeing on a bigger level. But I don't directly manage them. They report to their manager, let's say. And this is one of the big things that changed when I shifted from being a lead engineer on the team working on initiative to go more to technical leadership, is that you need to try to influence people without having the authority. You cannot really tell them what to do, but you can yeah, you have to influence them to make the things you want to happen a reality. So one of the things I worked on is like providing technical direction through creating a shared vision for the teams. But then after that, you need to influence all the stakeholders, which is, well, business side, leadership, engineering, product, also design. So you need to build up trust with the team, and yeah, that's a major shift. But yeah, it's less coding. You need to have a wider scope of understanding, right? I also need to understand kind of how things work in the backend, in infrastructure, and kind of link all the things together, um, and provide the technical direction for the team.
So leading so many teams and front-end engineers, what are some processes that you see as like really, really good? Like, for example, I really like RFCs when building something or small POCs before building a big feature. What do you think are some processes that every team needs or something that you see has brought really big value to your company?
Yeah, there are some of these things that you mentioned. We at New Relic do RFCs or change documents. They're kind of the same thing. We have also decision documents for important decisions. I think these two are I would say almost mandatory, especially, well, we work quite remote, and we're a global company. So writing things down is just the only way of communicating with teams across the globe to work in an async manner. So it's even more important now. And on top of that, like we're getting more AI into our workflow. So if they're able to read those documents and get that context, that is much better than having knowledge silos within the team, right?
Yeah.
But change documents, for example, what I've observed in my experience, just the act of having a person or a team write down the change, only doing that without even anyone reviewing it, that already improves the solution by quite a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then if someone reviews it with some other perspective, because now that's possible because it's somewhere that you can share with other stakeholders, it gets improved, the change or the proposal or the solution by another factor. So it's just kind of getting a process for people to write things down is already so valuable. And then the same with decision documents. Let's say there's an important decision. Just the act of a team or person writing down the problem statement, gathering some data that is relevant to this decision, defining multiple options, and weighing the pros and cons, let's say, and the costs and the risks. Only the act of doing that, even if you don't share it with anyone, it's already improving the decision by X amount, right? So these are the processes I would definitely recommend. And you will see that people start writing those documents and, yeah, actually, I was thinking option A or B. Actually, we can combine it. There's even a better option C, right? So yeah, these things really happen, really help. And you said something else that I forgot right now, that you mentioned besides these
Mentioned,
documents.
I mentioned the POCs that you also said, like
Yeah,
building POCs before building features.
yeah. This is a huge thing as well. So since I transitioned from being so hands-on to more technical leadership, you get a very different perspective from the business side. So when you're working in your domain and your project and your team, you're often sometimes so focused, so isolated, you don't have all the business context, why things are happening, right? Having this broader, wider perspective really changed my thinking on some of the things, how I approach things. And one of the huge or one of the biggest one, and it's maybe a bit of a cliche or the one that you hear a lot, but it's so true, is to really put yourself in the customer's shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that will just really improve your understanding of the problem that you're trying to solve. Sometimes we're just creating very complex solutions, but we're actually solving the wrong problem. And I think POCs and trying things out is a big part of that. Like really try it out how the customer, in this case, sometimes the customer is an internal developer, right? Would use your new API, right? Do a POC. Does it really work? How is the experience of using your new feature? And yeah, besides that, it doesn't even have to be a technical POC. Like it can also, so I did this more recently that I just started to write the documentation first before there was any implementation. So how would the user really experience this new thing that we're thinking of? I just started writing the documentation first, like, okay, and you just by doing that, you're already kind of seeing things, this is not really right. I haven't thought about that. Maybe we should revisit that part because it's really hard to explain and it kind of smells, right?
Mm-hmm.
And having the customer and also the business in mind, yeah, it really changes things.
Yeah, that's true. One thing I get, like you're directing the vision of all these teams, and I'm guessing it's really stressful. Like, what do you do to like decompress, to chill out after work? How's your favorite weekend going?
To answer that first thing, the first part, creating. So I was kind of thrown into this. Okay, now you're a technical leader, you're an architect, and build a 5-year vision. It's like, okay, I really struggle with that. It's not easy. Build a technical direction, but it was. it's sometimes good to be thrown out of your comfort zone, and I learned a ton how to on how to do this in a structured way. And yeah, I really enjoyed that. So yeah, but it can be stressful, especially if you have these very big problems. It can feel overwhelming. So to come to your second part of the question, how to de-stress from that? Well, I guess this is personal, but for me at least, it's doing sports is really helping. I used to play basketball on a high
Mm.
level when in the Netherlands, where I'm from, a long time ago. But I got injured with my knee, so unfortunately I cannot play. It's a bit too risky. But I still try to do kind of high intensity sports, like I do spinning classes or mountain biking. It's really, I mean, you cannot think of work. You need to be focused, otherwise you drive off the mountain, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's dangerous. So you have to be focused, and yeah, that really, for me personally, it really helps me to decompress and relax and take my mind off. Yeah. But yeah, maybe more in general, I think what's also good, because I work quite a lot of days from home, and
Hmm.
like personal life and work gets kind of mixed, right? So the working from home, I think what I do, what also really helps is really create kind of let's say a finishing routine or a shutdown process, let's say after each day, but also after each week. So each day also like don't leave things open when you finish your work day. If there's something open, just write it down. Next thing in the morning, I'm gonna work on that. So you're not like thinking about it the rest of the evening. And the same in the end of the week for me, because if I don't manage my time, it will be managed for me, let's say.
Hmm.
So I really have to plan my next day and say, okay, hey, these 4 hours, I'm gonna work on the POC and no meetings, so I'll cancel all the meetings. So I intentionally kind of prioritize on the most impactful things that I can work on the week ahead. But it also serves as a kind of nice marker, like, okay, this is the end of the week. Now spend time with family and friends. And it's also a nice moment sometimes. I don't do this very often, but to reflect a bit, like on the week, how it went.
Hmm.
So yeah, this is kind of how I, let's say, manage myself.
That's very nice. Thank you for sharing. And one more question. I think we're coming up. We had this amazing discussion. I absolutely loved it. What's a
Right.
book that you would recommend my readers read? Can be technical. Actually, give me one technical and one non-technical. What do you enjoy?
Uh, okay, will be hard to pick. I think it depends. So for let's start with technical first. I think one that kind of relevant to, let's say, principal engineer, architect, staff engineering. I think the staff engineering part, I think it's called from
Yes,
Tanya.
Anya O'Reilly. Yeah.
That one is a really really good one. It helped me also a lot with what I just said before, with like creating a vision and a strategy. It references also to some other books like uh, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, which is also an amazing book. So yeah, highly recommend that one if you're like kind of in a transition from, let's say, a lead position into kind of more technical leadership. For just software engineering, one that I really liked. Sorry, it's another technical book, so just more for
Oh,
software
as
engineering.
many as you want. I don't mind. Give
uh,
me 10.
One that I really like is Philosophy of Software Design from, I'm really bad with names, John something, which is, I really like that one because it really clicked with me, or it really resonated with me because of my own experience. Maybe it's
Mm.
not the same for someone else, but for me, it resonated kind of with all the best practices that I found to be true about software design. He kind of goes over that and has kind of similar, yeah, that one.
Oh yeah, this one.
Yeah. What's the author's name?
It is John Austerhout.
Yeah.
Austerhout? I
Yeah.
hope I'm not
And and
misspelling.
and and it really goes into kind of, okay, why software, where does complexity in software come from and what you can do about it. And there's some best practices and ways to think about it. I think it's brilliant. And software design is really a craft, an art almost. So yeah, I
I
really
did
like that
find
one.
it really, really technical though. This book, like a philosophy of software design, felt like a college book, like that I had to read when I was in college, which I enjoyed.
I believe he also teaches this as a class, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So these are the technicals. I can give you maybe one non-technical book as well. One that I really enjoyed or found valuable for myself was 4,000 Weeks from Oliver Berkman. It
1,000.
basically, I mean, we live in a very productivity obsessed world, right?
Mm-hmm.
To squeeze everything about the time that we have. And 1,000 weeks stands for the 4,000 weeks that you have in your lifetime, let's say, on average. And it goes into kind of how to deal with the fact that we just have finite time on Earth here. And yeah, it's a relatively small book, and I like the way how he thinks about this, and it can also really help you in your career how to deal with this whole productivity pressure.
Amazing. I just ordered it, so just so you know.
Okay,
It's my next read
great,
now. Thank you
great.
so much. Thank you for the recommendations. Thank you for coming. I think it was an amazing discussion. I loved it that we got deep into micro-frontends observability. It was really, really cool. So thank you again for coming, and hope to see you soon, maybe at the next React meetup for a beer. Let's hang
Yeah,
out.
definitely. Yeah, thank you so much for having the really, really great podcast, and I really enjoyed our conversation. And I will come to the next React.js meetup for sure. We'll have a beer.
Thank
Sounds
you.
good.
See you soon.
See you.